people. Cool. So we're going to talk through it. We're going to walk through it and we'll answer questions. So starting off, what is Recoil and why do we care? Recoil is a state management library for React. I think only React. I might be wrong, but in our case, for React. State management library is basically a way to maintain your data in a useful place in a React application instead of passing state down through props and using callbacks passed back up to change stuff in your main app. Why do we care about that? Well, I'm sure by now you've built something complex enough, like 2 or 3 levels of components deep, where say you have like this kind of like tree of components, right? And you have stuff, and you have a button down here, and then maybe there's stuff over here, and down in this component tree there's something that changes when you hit that button. So in React straight, we would keep our state up in the top, the app component or whatever. We would pass it down to wherever we're displaying it over here, and we'd have to pass down callbacks over here to this button that says, hey, when you press this button, change state up at the top again, and that'll go back down. That's a pain for just one thing. Imagine how much of a pain it is for a whole application full of stuff. And then also, if you decide to move that button somewhere, or put that data somewhere else, or have a different display for it, you have to rewire all of your props that you're passing down. So reason A, passing a lot of state back and forth in props is gross. I'm sure you saw in did we do the bot battler code challenge in phase 2? There'll be components in the middle that's just like, my only job is to take stuff and pass it down, and that's terrible. It's a nightmare to maintain, and exposes more surface area for bugs to come up. And that's the main reason. The secondary reason, I guess, is more of a philosophical one. State in React is really intended to be, a state in a component is supposed to be the state for that component. So that's just telling us what state that component is in. Is it a modal that is being shown or not? Is it the stuff that's in a form field? Are you in dark mode or light mode? The things that affect, is this dropped down? Is this nav showing a certain way? So we want the state to only describe the state of the components. Data is separate from that. Our application data, our models are separate from that. Our components don't really care. There's not really anything that's specifically tied to it. So ideally, we would want to have our model, our data, somewhere available to the application, and then we can concentrate on, we don't muddy up the state with that of our application, the state of the components themselves. So that's where state management systems come in. There's a bunch of them. Recoil is my current favorite. Past favorites have included Redux, MobX. There's a bunch of different ones with a bunch of different ways of doing things. I really like Redux still. I think the way it handles things with the selectors and reducers and all that stuff is really great for a larger ecosystem of an app. I think the size of things that we're working on and the size of things that I usually work on the side really don't need that much architecture, although it is very satisfying. So Recoil is a great in between. So basically what Recoil does is give you a data store, kind of, which is basically a collection of atoms, they call them. And these are things that you define that are your state. So it could be, you could have just one atom that's a big object, a hash that says, here are all the keys of my things. Kind of clunky. You could have 50 different atoms for flags and strings and whatever numbers, or anywhere in between. the important thing is that those things live. You have your application tree here. They kind of live surrounding the tree. So you'll see in just a second how that's set up. And then basically, it used to be a little bit more difficult. Now we have hooks, and basically it makes available all these hooks that, or you can import these hooks that the store makes available. So you can basically treat them like a state with a couple little bells and whistles. Only it'll be a recoil state instead of a component state. Yeah, and it's pretty simple setup. The third cool thing, I guess, is that any kind of state management system that we're probably going to use really helps reduce that surface area of bugs, because you need to define what the kinds of data are and how they can be changed and whatnot. So it's not going to let you, accidentally throw, depending on how you have it set up, it makes it harder to throw like a string in something that should be an object or whatever. I don't think we're actually going to look at that part right now, but we will look at it later. Cool. So any sort of like overarching questions or philosophical questions about recoil or state management systems?
So in our project, they've mentioned to use Redux, so we can use Recoil instead, right?
Yeah, I recommend using recoil over Redux for people who haven't used it either. But if you want to learn Redux, feel free. I also have some videos I recorded on that. And the curriculum material is pretty good. But recoil,
Both works the same way.
yeah, it does the same thing, and recoil, I think, literally takes a tenth of the time. So I recommend that. Yeah. Other questions? All right. So I have I put together a little demo application so you can actually see what it is. Sometimes I'll start from a gross regular app and change it, but I'm just going to walk through the one that I built here. So let me go ahead and share my desktop. Oh my, I just upgraded to Ventura and everything looks different. Even the Zoom it's not showing me what we're looking at. Okay. Allow Zoom to share your screen. Come on, man. Let me update my system preferences so I can do that. Come on, buddy. May not be able to. Well, let's see. It says I might not be able to record, but we'll see. Let me know if you can see my screen here. Everyone good? Anyone not able to see my screen? All right. So this is the little demo that I put together. And this is the the working version instead of the version that we're going to step through. I'm just going to walk you through the parts of it, and so we can get a general idea of what it's going to look like this when it's set up. And I'll share the repo with you when we're done. Their documentation is also really good. If you just go to, let me paste it into, yeah, I have it here. In chat here, if I can, wherever chat is hidden. Where's my chat window? It's gone somewhere. Nope. Okay. No chat for me. It's at recoiljs.org/docs. It's really good. So if you need help getting set up there, they also have it there. I'm just gonna walk us through what we got here. So basically we're going to npm install recoil here. Basically just do npm install recoil, and then it'll add it to your package JSON, and it'll make all that stuff available. You don't need to do a DOM version. It just handles it all in the one. So we've got our, this was just a create React app I threw together with a really simple button and whatnot. So the first thing we're going to do is import the recoil root from recoil, and that is basically the component that says, hey, everything inside this component, make make the store in this Recoil app available, not app, in this store. Recommended to only have one store per application. You probably could get away with doing multiple ones if you absolutely had to. I think it would be really rough, and I wouldn't recommend it. That's probably indicative of larger problems. So, and that's the same with Redux or any other state management system. There's usually one store per application, data store. So, and this is a we've seen these kind of components all over the place. Maybe not specifically talked about them, but they basically, it says, here's a component. I'm going to look at all the children inside that component and do something with them. In this case, it's looking at our app component and injecting all of its tendrils into it so we can use the hooks to get to our store. So let's look at that app component. So I've got a couple simple things here. I've got, and let me actually start it up so I can point to things without, cool, great. npm start us up. So I can just point at things. Let me npm install first. And npm start. Great. So as that's coming up. So this is just an application, really simple. We've got a counter, which is going to display a count, a number. We're going to have a counter button component that has a button that change that count and a reset button that's going to set it back to its default state.
I've got a quick question.
Yeah, go for
it. So you mentioned the store. Is that just the hook that you have up at the top of your app that keeps all your state?
Yeah, so the data store is basically the collection in Recoil. It's the collection of atoms that we're going to create, and I'll show those to you.
And atoms being state.
Yeah, atoms are basically the bits of state that we're going to create for this.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So here is our application. Super easy, super simple. We're just going to look at our count here. We can make the number go up, and we can reset it. Simple. So here we have, so all of this is contained inside that Recoil root there. Notice that we don't have a state at the top of this application because we don't need it. We're not passing down the states or as props or callback functions as our props because we don't need them here. So let me show you. Well, first, let's see what it looks like to use it. So I'm going to import. Oh, and this is the cool thing. This is a cool thing about Recoil. When we just use state in React normally, right? We say something like, const, thing and set thing equals use state, blah blah blah. And that's going to set our selector, basically our value, and our setter. Recoil, you can do that. You can also only grab the value or only grab the setter, which cleans up a lot, I think. You don't have unused stuff hanging around if you're not going to use it. So in this case, we are just displaying a value. So we are displaying count in here. Count's being set by, we've got this hook called use recoil value. And what recoil value does is it takes one of these atoms. You probably rename that to counter state atom, but this is our counter state. And so we're importing this from our atoms library. And what this does is when we say use recoil value or use recoil state or use recoil set state, we give it the atom we want to interact with, and it'll give us functions and variables to use those values or set those values. And as usual with React, if they're updated, everything re-renders. So counter state is something that we need to build ourselves out. But Recoil doesn't know about it by default. So I've got this file here called atoms.js. And this is what an atom looks like. Basically, we import this atom function from Recoil, and that's Recoil's way of saying, hey, give me an object and I will set up all the state stuff for you. And in our case, it's going to be super, super easy. We're going to export it so we can import it over here. in our here. So we're importing it by name from atoms. And we are just setting it up here. So we're saying here's our state that we're getting. We're using the atom function from Recoil, and we're giving it an object. Recoil atoms need a unique key that it uses to index them internally, and a default value. And there's some other bells and whistles we can add later. But this is the simplest case. Key is, I usually just use the same name as the state, since I know it's not going to be duplicated. And we get a default value of 0. If we're using TypeScript, which we haven't talked about at all, it's really nice because then it won't let you assign something else to it. Once you set it to 0 or tell it the number, it's like, hey, you can't assign a string or an object to that. And this is it for setting up our state. We tell it what it's called and what the default value is. And we use the atom function to tell Recoil that that's going to be our atom. Super, super dead simple. So, and then we can use it in our counter. Once that's set there, we're exporting it. We're going to import it. And that's the atom. That's the sort of the key to the safe deposit box with our state in it. And we just say, use the hook, use Recoil value for that atom. And it gives us that. And now it's updated in the state, which is living around, is the water that our app swims in, right? So on the other side, we have our buttons here. So let me just look at counter button. And counter button is similar. And we are using the same counter state. So this is going to be accessing the same state in our store. And we are going to use a full Recoil set state from Recoil. And that lets us get the actual count and set the actual count. And this looks, exactly like useState, only has the word Recoil in it. And instead of setting a default value here, we're giving it the atom to work with, which has the default value set inside it. Otherwise, it's the same. We're getting our value and we're getting our setter. And now we can just say, hey, I'm going to use the set count to increase it by 1 on click. We don't need to pass down a callback function. We don't need to do any of that garbage. Also, you can say, hey, in the store, set that to whatever it is +1. And then when it does it, it's going to re-render this with our current value because we're using that. And as we saw, or let me show you the reset button. This is only getting the setter, I think. Yeah. So again, using the same atom, we're just grabbing the set Recoil state hook, and that's just going to be our function. And we can reset it by passing it a callback or a click handler that says set it to 0, and then it updates the state. We don't need the value in this component, so we're not getting it. We're just getting the setter. And so then when we reset to 0, boop, it's set to 0, and we're all good. And like really, that is it. There's not a whole lot more to it. It's really simple, really easy. Another nice thing about having your atoms here is that one of the nice things about having your atoms here is that you can see every piece of state that is in your application all at once. So if I've got a dozen things here, they're not scattered all over my app in different components. I can see all the model data for my application in one place. And it's not cluttering up the components. I can just look through and say, oh yeah, I already have a state for the user info once they're logged in, or the logged in flag, or light mode, dark mode, whatever. I can see where all that data is there. If we need more, we can change it. And if there's something we don't need, we can get rid of it. And really, that is it. It is way simpler than something like Redux. Yeah, there's not, and that's why I've seen people do 2 hours on this, and really there is half an hour stretching it. this is basically it. So I guess I don't really have a lot more to show you. There are a few things you can do with selectors, which I don't find that useful. You can kind of have it do some transformations in here when you call a get. That's what that other thing was here. So basically, instead of just having an object, you can give it for the get in here, or in the object, you can give it a get function, and that will, if I want to return it as a string instead of a number, I can say return count, and have that template in there. I like doing that externally. One of the things that I've used it for that I think is useful is you can do localization with it really easily. So in the get, you can like look at the state for what language you're using, and then have it go through the data and return the right one. Again, matter of style, whether you do that in your store or in the application, or if there's another library for it, which there probably should be. But yeah, there's a few fun things you can do with it, but the core of it is anything that we're going to be doing probably is right here, super easy. So yeah, I would recommend, maybe not necessarily in the project that you're doing now, just like spin up a new quick create React app and see if you can just make a button like this go. And then you can bring that technology into your project if you so desire. Yeah, and that's it. That's the pitch. That's the walkthrough. What questions do we have?
I have one.
Mhm.
So, if, for example, you told we can set different states and different components, so for that we need to fetch, do the fetch request in those components, right?
Yeah,
So based on whatever
yeah,
we want the state to be.
yeah. So, for example, like if I wanted to, when the application loads, get something from an API. So I do like my use effect here, or, use effect, and I do my fetch from the API here, and do my .thens, and in the last .then I would take my JSON and do something with it here. And probably what I would do with it here is I'd grab a setter. So I'd have this is for a playing card application. So I'd grab cards is use recoil, use set recoil set state here, with an atom that I created up here. This is going to be my cards atom or cards state, and then I just this would be set cards, sorry, and then just set cards here. So we're only accessing the state here, and then we don't have to pass cards down to anything now. And we have a component down here, and we just say like, oh, grab a random card out of cards or whatever, or display all the user information here, or give us a list of the properties we're looking at. So yeah, we'd still need to use a use effect in a component. Probably the root is a good place to do that if you're loading a bunch of data at the start. But if you got something like a user profile page, or I don't know, the product details or whatever, you can definitely do your fetches there and update your stuff with that there. And that might be arguably maybe something to keep in state, because that's part of what that's the data that component is showing, that you're not storing it part of the application. That's really a matter of choice, I think. Whatever works best for your app, for your brain. Did that answer what you're asking?
Oh, yeah, that's good. And another thing, can we use like use state together with recoil state, whatever
Absolutely.
we're using?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
They're independent. There's two different ways of accessing information in two different places.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so in here I could have like my dark mode thing is a use state, and then go from there. Awesome. What other questions do we have?
I got something.
Yeah.
So did you suggest that when you're using recoil or redux, that we should keep all states high in app, or did you say that we should have those states in the components that they're used in?
Yeah, so when we get to this point, I feel like it's useful to think about state as the state of the components, and store or data or model, whatever you want to call it, as kind of like our application data, and that's going to be in our recoil or redux or something. And so that sort of application data is not how do I want to say this? It's kind of like the data that we are manipulating and showing with our application. It's not part of the application. The part of the application is, you know, are we displaying the login form? Is it dark mode? And so on. Is this menu open? What's the value of this form field? So those, and I like to scope component things as close as possible to where they're being used. Almost never passing state around in props. You might need to here and there, but in general, like state is going to stay local to your component, and then your data, your application data, you're going to access through your data store.
Okay,
and you don't have to pass that around. It can be just accessed from anywhere.
Right. So then you're suggesting keep it as close to the component as what's needed. And then if you need that state in another component, you can easily call on it using recoil.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And again, that's a sort of philosophical point that takes a little bit of getting
that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And again, like it's a preference. You can, different things work better for different people. So my best advice is play with it and see what works for you. And if something feels like it's clunky or hard to use, think about ways to change it so it's less so.
So it sounds like some people might do it different ways. Some people might like to keep their state higher up in app. Others might like to keep it close to the component.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but rule 2, whatever works best for your brain is the way to do it.
I gotcha.
Or your team.
Yeah.
Awesome. What other questions do we have? Cool. Yeah, like I said, super short, super quick run through. Their documentation is great. So if you need it, maybe I can get to chat now. Can I get to chat now? Hey, there it is. Boom. Their docs are there. They're getting started, and basics are really great. There's not much to it. But yeah, give it a shot. Play around with it a little bit. If you have questions about this, or if you want to take a look at Redux, if you feel like you have extra time, I'm happy to talk about that. But yeah, last call for questions, I guess. All right. Thanks for hanging out. I'll post this in the usual place, and yeah, I'll see y'all in a little bit.
Cool. Thank you, Mark.